Hello, I'm Martin Mercer.
And I'm James Mastriani.
You've never heard of us.
We're two Brits who grew up in North London and have had varying success in the film and television industry.
In our ever-advancing age, we find ourselves on
the wrong side of Hollywood.
In our series of podcasts, we'll share our experiences of what it's like being a British bloke living and working,
or not,
in the biz.
We'll discuss everything from fish and chips to things that wind us up.
So stay with us. It's all uphill from here.
This podcast may contain strong language. If you're of a sensitive nature or easily offended, we invite you to, as they say in Blighty, jog on.
For our first episode, what are we going to talk about today?
Yes. Well, today we're going to talk about us. Now, us, who are we? Well, let's be honest, we're nobodies. But I think that's what makes it. I speak for myself. I think that makes it very interesting because most people are exposed to Los Angeles as successes. Sure. Yes, in those success stories, in many podcasts, it's like, well, how did you get there? But quite frankly, it's very sugar-coated, I think. And also, I think there's a little bit of what we say in British Yiddish, took us lacking.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, for those that don't understand Yiddish, that means bottom kissing. So I think we're in the trenches. And you've got a very interesting background, James, which you're very shy about. Very shy. And I think, personally, you should have used it more.
Why are you bringing this up?
Because it's about you. It's about you and me on this first one.
Okay, so, yes, there is a family celebrity, as it were.
Right.
And it's not Mastroianni, although my uncle always tells us to say, yes, we are related to Marcello. But the actual family connection is Richard Burton. And Richard was...
Who's that? For the younger members of the audience.
He's a very famous Welsh actor, which I can't do the accent. But he was my grandmother's brother, so he's actually my great uncle.
I mean, this is a movie star.
Yeah.
And this movie star was James's uncle.
Not that it's done me any good.
Yeah,
because I don't like to promote that.
Right, but this is, and I think this is what could be interesting. You're in Los Angeles, this is, and honestly, James, this has always been my thing. It's a tool. Now, you've got to balance it between going, oh, hi, my Uncle Richard Burton, and most studio executives now be like, who? Richard who? I never heard of him. But the thing is that there is something there that it is a key to a door, and I think people need, realise that being here, you have to use all the tools at your disposal if you don't have a trust fund.
Sure. No, sure, but the thing is I've never felt comfortable doing that, so it's not been on my radar.
But I'll tell you why, and this is, sorry to cut in, but this is about being British. You're not comfortable doing it because it's boasting. In Australia, they have expression of the tallest poppy. If you're a poppy, you get cut down. You're growing above the grass.
Right.
Something like that. But they have that expression, and it's very British to not push yourself forward and everything. And I'm suggesting maybe it's that. Maybe I'm talking out of my bottom.
No, I don't think so. But I always feel awkward because I feel like I have to explain it.
Right. So what was it like being Richard Burton? You told me he would come round to your house in a Mini. In a red Mini.
No. He would he would come to visit his sister, my grandmother. He would show up in a nice big Rolls Royce, but it was one that was hired and came with the limo service.
Sure.
But back in 1980, I think, he wanted to buy his then wife Susie Hunt a Mini as a gift. So he bought a Mini Cooper S, and because he had some terrible neck and back problems. Yes, it was. He asked Guy, who was just turned 18 or 19 at that point, to drive it back to Switzerland with him. So they had this amazing road trip.
Wow. And can I just say that Guy is, of course, in his own right, an amazing director. He just did the show The Shark is Broken, West End, possibly maybe coming to the US.
Yeah.
So, I mean, amazing.
Yep. And he's an actor in his own right. But he's the one with the amazing Richard Burton story. Guy always had this passion to be an actor. And when he first told me that he was going to be an actor, I'm like, no, you're not. And then he performed his first play in the back garden for friends and family who were going to help finance the play for his first London run. And it was called The Boy's Own Story by Peter Flannery, I believe.
Yeah.
And me and a few other people, Derek and Richard and Annabelle, we videoed it.
And there was a wonderful poster, I might add, I saw was designed for it, and I thought, my Christ, who was that? Who did that?
Some hack called Martin Mercer.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
as you were.
No, and it was brilliant, and it was. I remember that. Yeah, that's right. And
I'm counting on it for my pension diet. Yes,
it was amazing, and I was, quite frankly, I was blown away, and I was like, okay, well, my brother has some serious acting chops.
So you're going to say some severe acne, but now, so this obviously, so you're surrounded with all this stuff. You had a very musical uncle. You had,
well, my father was a musician. He was a violinist and a pianist. My father, by the way, was from New York.
So he was Italian.
He was
Italian
first generation American with Italian parents.
Okay.
And he met my mother when my mother was working at the studios here. They ended up moving back to England. I was born in England, as was my brother Guy and my sister Celia. And so I was brought up in England and very musical. Dad was one of the founding members of the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. He was very active in the music scene in New York. And my mother was a singer from Wales, as was her sister, my aunt Rhiannon, who was an opera singer. Rhiannon married Brian, who was a professor of music at King's College, London, before becoming professor of music at Oxford. And so this very musical background.
Yeah.
And I didn't realise it at the time, but just privileged to grow up with all this music and
the film stuff, is it? Because your mum had worked at MGM, hadn't she?
She worked for Goldwyn Studios.
Okay, Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studios.
No,
okay.
Just Goldwyn.
Okay,
Goldwyn Studios. Okay. And she had worked. Well, before that, she'd worked. Uncle Richard got her on The Robe, I think.
Right.
Which was shooting in Madrid. And so Mum was in the script department, but working on that. And then when she came here, she ended up working for Samuel Goldwyn Studios. And I think that's when my dad's brother, he was a Teamster, and he was working for Paramount. And apparently various connections, whatever, met my mum before my dad and said, I know a guy who you're going to really like. And apparently Mum didn't like him. Right. But
that's how the best relationship started.
I think he wooed her, and the rest is as I say, history. But and so I was very privileged to but didn't know it at the time, to grow up in a very musical family.
And that kind of got you sort of in, you were interested in film from an early age.
Well, yeah. Well, I had good friends like you and Nick Jones who had cine cameras.
Yes, Super 8.
Super 8. And we would make Star Wars, like, let's build a trench and run a camera through it, and it's like, why doesn't it look as good as
but we
were 7 and 8 years old, so it's like,
I mean, we met at school, didn't we? I mean, I always say that I remember you in your nappies, because when we moved to Hadleywood, I suppose we can say that.
That's diapers for our American
diapers,
audience.
yeah. I always say I remember seeing James in diapers, because I have this memory in my head of going into a house. It's probably complete rubbish, but going in and seeing this little lad there, a bit younger than me, not much, but a bit younger, and he was still in nappies, bless him. He still is, but that's
a different problem.
And we've known each other ever since then. So quite fascinating, I think, to have known each other then, to have been pursuing this sort of artistic filmmaking sort of bent, as it were, and to have ended up here, all these years later.
Interesting side note, just to circle back to Uncle Rich, or Richard Burton, was again, you've knighted him. He was not knighted.
Was he not knighted?
No, he wasn't.
That's terrible, isn't it?
Martin had always wanted to meet Uncle Rich.
Oh yeah. Now this is a major disappointment, and I'm still bitter about it.
Yeah, and he is.
Why don't you explain yourself?
Well. So that summer when Uncle Rich was sitting in the back garden, I had my first girlfriend, Tracy, and so I knew that Uncle Rich was coming to town, so we ditched school that day and we went back to Hadley Wood.
Right.
And I introduced Uncle Rich to Tracy, and Tracy was like, very pleased to meet you, Mr. Burton. And then I remember she called her mum and said, Mum, I'm at James's house. And she goes, what are you doing at James's house? And she said, I'm meeting Richard Burton. And he goes, I'll be right there. So she hung up the phone and drove over, by which time Uncle Richard left. Then there was another time when...
I can just imagine this woman careening through traffic. We've got to see Burton!
Yes. Anyway.
Skidding to a stop and he's gone.
So...
That's how I felt. Gone.
Yeah, well...
Because James didn't... Basically...
Well, then my neighbour across the street, Jai, he came over one day and just so happened Uncle Rich was there.
Oh, jeez.
So he's like, oh, can I meet him? I was like, let me ask him. And so I go, and of course Uncle Rich was always very kind to, yes, hello, come on.
Come on in, boy.
And then I remember when...
he's British.
Yeah, we said hello, and Jai was absolutely thrilled, and then he turned away and he goes, oh my God, my fly was undone the whole time.
Very Jai.
Yeah, very Jai. But yeah, so there was that, and then of course it came out that these two events had happened, and Martin was like, wait a second.
Yeah.
So he's met your girlfriend and your neighbour, and you haven't introduced him to me, and then he died. So that was that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's a shame. I mean, I would have, I don't know, probably too immature back then to know what to have said and done, being a prolific child actor myself.
Yes,
I probably would have, Mr. Burton would have taken a look at my resume, his eyes would have popped. But, no, it would have been fun to have met him. But it's fine. It's just something I can hold against you, James.
Yeah, of course. And, well, as you brought it up, why don't you tell us about your childhood acting experiences?
Well, I thought you'd never asked, dear boy. No, I mean, it's quite interesting. I don't have the wonderful rich background that James has in the artistic influences, but what my mum, she was a dress designer, so she did have that artistic ability. She actually sketched and designed and made her own wedding dress, which I didn't know until recently. And but I always knew Mum's sketch designs and stuff. And Dad, he was a dental surgeon, but he always loved film. And was pretty artistic himself. When I was younger and I showed an ability to draw, we would go on holiday and we would sketch things together and stuff. So that was quite fun. And Dad would give his appraisal and and Dad came from a generation, the generation between us and our fathers is much shorter, I think, than the generation now because of technology. But back then, so Dad's generation was quite tough and hard, and so Dad's appraisals were quite tough. But he was very supportive, and so I always had that support. But what I did really get from Dad was storytelling and that love of cinema. He was the one that told me about, things like Jason and the Argonauts. Ray Harryhausen was this man that animated these creatures. He was the one that loved Star Trek, and then when I got older, one of my favourite memories, we'd go down to Video Wizard, it was called, in Potter's Bar, which is a small town on the outskirts of London, well known for its debauchery and red light district. And basically, we would go into the video shop, get these videos, and Dad was great. We would get all what they called the video nasties. Right. Zombie. Yeah. We will eat you.
I spit on your grave.
I actually didn't see that one, but Stellar Star Crash, that dreadful Italian sort of Star Wars rip-off, that's just so fantastic. Because you've never seen that. No. And it's got Caroline Munro in it, who is this British pin-up. She was in James Bond. Oh. She was in The Spy Who Loved Me. All right. She played a helicopter pilot. Yes. So anyway, through Dad's influence, I was really interested in film. And the first film I saw, The Odeon, now called The Everyman in Barnet, another small town on the outskirts of London, famous actually for its appearance in Oliver Twist, because it's the first town that Oliver actually seeks shelter in the book. And so I went to the cinema with my parents, and that was back in the day when people smoked at the cinema. So you got these smoky projector beams. You'd see the usherettes with their little tubs of ice cream. There would be the adverts, Pearl and Dean, ba-ba, ba-ba, ba-ba. And the first film was Island on Top of the World with Donald Shindon. Do you remember Donald Shindon? And he played this explorer, and the airship was called the Hyperion, and I loved airships, and it was all about discovering this island at the top of the world that still had Vikings in there, And the matte work was done by the gentleman whose name I've forgotten, but he was a very famous British matte artist who moved to America and he worked at Disney. Peter Ellenshaw, I believe his name was.
Yep.
And he actually was a student of an artist called Pop Day, who did the original matte paintings we were discussing the other day, James, for the Black Narcissus.
Yeah, the Black Narcissus.
Black Narcissus, yeah. So Pop Day was the artist and Peter Ellenshaw was a student of him. So yeah, I saw that film and I was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do special effects. And then I just learned everything I could. There was a magazine called Look-In magazine. And sometimes there were programs on TV like Clapperboard by Chris Kelly that would show you. Now, we've got to remember, this is back in the day, you didn't have DVDs. You actually didn't have videos.
That's right.
When Chris Kelly was doing Clapperboard.
That's correct, yeah.
You know, so you had very small information,
right?
Didn't you?
But your dad was also very cool about buying sort of like 8mm
Yes,
prints of
right.
cinema.
That was the first home entertainment.
So you had Jaws and Close Encounters.
Yeah, but they were in sections.
Yeah,
they were in sections. You see, so and he had even got, bless him, he got Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and of course I remember and that seared into my, even teenager, because it was a pretty young teenager, mature wise. So that just seared into my brain. And but you had bits of Alien, bits of Star Wars. So yeah, I had all that kind of stuff, and so I read up as much as I could, and then when I went to Southgate School, miraculously, I met up with a friend. His name was James Gibbs, and his father was George Gibbs, who happened to be a special effects supervisor. And the only way I realised this was on our drama lesson. I can still remember this drama lesson, and we were all round in the lower school, sitting in this circle, and we all had to do this sort of little performance. And James does his performance, and the next thing I know, I see a hand rolling across the floor, and I'm like, with blood on it. I'm like, what? And it's James had brought this rubber hand, and of course, it wasn't just one of these rubbish joke ones. It was a professional hand from one of his dad's
molded,
movies, and I was like, where? And then he had a brick. He brought his rubber brick out, and that's how I learnt that his dad was this George Gibbs, special effects supervisor, who'd worked on The Omen, who'd worked on, he was working for John Richardson on that film, and he'd basically done tons of movies, and Flash Gordon, and Indiana Jones, and The Temple of Doom, and so it was really well known. So I was like, oh my God, and in my little brain, I got to be honest with you, I was like, I really want to get to know this guy, and I did. I made sure that I really got to know him, and I showed him my work and stuff.
The first movie he brought you in on was
Labyrinth, and that was, I was about to go to art college, but I didn't, I was so focused, and this is interesting because sometimes I think, I look back and I criticise myself and think, well, I was so focused on doing special effects. What if I had gone to art college? Would have I have been more successful now? Would I have been? Do you know what I mean? Because I remember with my mum, I was talking about. Mum was like, oh, you should, Denham Film School. Because like you, I made Super 8 films, and that's how we would do our Super 8 films together. Yours are actually much more put together. Mine were more like I would do gore effects.
I don't think so.
Well, that's just the way I see it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just...
I just wanted to do special effects so I'd blow stuff up.
Right, but you still
have
more...
the story around it, but it was about the special effect rather than the story.
Yeah, I mean, we were both into that. Like George, one day, he'd bring down these little gifts for me. Like, he brought and I wish I'd kept them. But did I? No, because that would be my pension now.
Yeah.
That would be my pension. Back then, I wasn't thinking about my pension. Now I am.
No one ever does.
Now I'm
just
thinking about it. But
now you're depressed.
I'm really thinking about it. I know I had an arm from the sequence on Labyrinth where Jennifer Connelly falls down the passageway of arms. I had one of those rubber arms. You
also had the head from
Jonathan Price from Brazil,
which we used many times in many of our shorts.
Poking rods through it, making his eyes pop out, doing all that kind of gore stuff. But I was like, oh my God, if I'd have kept this, I could have now sold it to the prop store for loads of wedge and be raking it in more than the current Prime Minister of Great Britain. And that's something. Anyway. Wow. But that was a wonderful experience. And then George, I basically I was going to go to art college. And I said, "Here, George, do you need any trainees on Labyrinth?" And he goes, "Well, Mark, I've got two. If you want to come on, you just have to do it for nothing." So I was like, "Yeah," and I was lucky to say yeah. And this always strikes me as well because You think, oh, I made my own luck. I asked George. But the thing is I was in a position where I wasn't paying rent.
Right.
Mum and Dad had a house. I was living there. I didn't have to worry.
Right.
You know what I mean?
But you were what, 18 when you went on to that?
Yes, 18.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
So I could work for nothing. I didn't have to worry about paying bills. That's what I'm saying. So it's easy for me to say, oh, I made my own luck. But no, I was in that right circumstance.
But also, because you were friends with James, you also were able to inconspicuously present to George
no, I did.
through James with these ideas.
No,
and
I can remember
special
doing it
effects
on
and stuff.
purpose.
Oh, really?
I made a decision to push myself. I know it sounds terrible
so
now.
basically, upshot is he knew your abilities.
Yeah.
Which is why he was probably more comfortable about bringing you on
Then
here
we go.
Than somebody who he didn't.
Yeah.
know.
No, you asked him.
I did ask him, but he didn't know me, and I had nothing to show.
Yeah,
So
it's okay.
No, it's fine.
I know you're bitter.
But he was no, but
No,
it
I
was
know
cool
you're bitter.
because I'm not bitter. I'm not bloody bitter.
No, it is tough. I mean, the thing is no, because I'd always, to be fair, I'd always, you know what, James, I'm gasping for a drink. Can I have that over there? It's just sitting there doing nothing.
That's my water. I'll get you some water. I'm going to step away from the mic for a moment. Keep talking.
Yeah. So he I made an effort. Actually, one of the interesting stories, I think it's interesting anyway, is that so I'd worked on Labyrinth as a trainee, and I ended up getting paid for it because I stuck with it, and George was happy with me. So I got £65 a week. That was my first wage, and the claim to fame is I made the robot that got crushed by a big rock. This was a robot that was firing its machine guns. So obviously the robot itself was made by Henson Creature people, but to make the one that blew up, George, again using very clever, don't make a replica of the robot because you're going to blow it up anyway, so take a photograph of it. And remember, this is back in the days when you had to get the stills for a photographer to take a picture. It had to be blown up on a very expensive printer.
Right.
But it was cheaper than making a mod. So they just made this huge life-size photograph cutout. And my job was to dress this robot.
Right.
So I dressed it. I stuck on the cannon. I painted it and did that.
I did not know that. I watched that the other day with Monty. I had no idea that was a photograph on top of a...
So when you see that big rock rolling up,
Yeah.
and then it hits the thing, that was a photograph with a cannon stuck on it, and just some bits and pieces to give it dimension. And
How
then
cool is that?
Yeah, and also I helped, at 18 I was helping them rig the explosives, meaning they would, basically what they did, they had these hits and they were wrapped in cork blocks.
Right.
And they would hot glue those onto the model, and then on cue, boom, 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 boom,
Right.
blew it up as the rock hit it. But so I had a few fun jobs, and that was because of George. If it had been up to the others, I would have just been sweeping the floor, making tea. Now, I did have to make tea and sweep the floor, but George, very kindly, he kept giving me these fun jobs. Another one was when you see David Bowie holding the glass sphere and the hand turns round,
Right.
and it turns into a snake. So what we had, George was like, here, Mark, I've got a hand, it's fixed to a stepper motor. A stepper motor is where you can control the speed again and again, so you can film it again and again. And I want you to put the black glove on it. So that's a bit of a problem. It's like, hey, you got this glove. Right. How do you take this glove and put it on a stiff hand that's not flexible? So I had to unstitch it, basically.
Oh, really?
Unstitch the glove, put it on, glue it, and then stitch it back and make it look like it hadn't been touched. Because remember, the camera's right on there. That was my first job. So George would give me all those jobs, and that was great. And I'd finished on Labyrinth, and then went on to do some other stuff. And George was like, "Well, you're on your own now. You've given you a start. I'm not going to kind of be wet nursing you for the rest of your life." So I went and did other things, and then he was doing Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And of course I was hearing about it as I was coming home from my job, which was model making at the time, and then I'd go and see James at the weekend, and George saying he was having a problem with rats, as we all do, and he said, we just can't get this rat. So I was like, you know what, in my spare time I'm gonna make a rat. So that's what I did. I went home, I sculpted this rat over my weekend. I brought hair, I made it all, and then the next time I went to see George, I said, "Oh, George, I just made this rat. I was hearing you talk. What do you think?" He goes, oh, yeah, all right, well, can you leave that with me? So I left it with him, and then he called me up like a week later and said, I want to offer you a job on Indiana Jones.
Nice.
And The Last Crusade. I was like, yeah, great. And this time wasn't as a trainee, it was actually as a junior sculptor modeler, special effects modeler, as they called them. There's all these divisions in movie making. You can be in Britain anyway, it's called, you're a modeler. You're not a sculptor because, quite rightly, if you're a sculptor, you're working in stone. You know what I mean? That's a real sculptor, isn't it? But modelling is where you're taking clay and you're fashioning things to be used in the cinema, whether it be, if you think about Harry Potter, the stone ornaments and stuff, that's all sculpted or modelled in clay or moulded in fiberglass or polystyrene, styrofoam. And so George was like, so my first job was to help make the rats. And so that was...
I mean, there were real rats in there as well, right?
Well, they had real rats. Mike Cullen was the animal specialist. Yeah. And we had this set, which is called the Catacombs. Yeah. And that was filled with water on Elstree. It was the sunken set, the tank set at Elstree. I think Moby Dick had been shot in that tank. I'm not sure. But anyway, the catacombs were built and the rats were left in the skulls and everything. And of course, rats do as they do. There were more rats as the weeks went on. And so we had a rat population explosion. And the set was gated and we'd all have to put on these dry suits. And we had the Phantom dry suit ripper. Because basically you'd step into the water and suddenly you'd feel this cold water filled with rat poop and whatever sneaking up your leg. And somebody had gone round and was just piercing all the dry suits for the effects boys and props. Yeah. So that was a bit unnecessary, but that was a great experience because we had these mechanical rats. But anyway, I won't bore you with that. But nonetheless, it was a really good experience, and so that's how it all started. Really, the journey from into a career. Yeah.
Wow.
It's kind of basically our history, really, in a nutshell. Oh.
Martin and I know each other very well. We can finish each other's
sentences. Yes. Yeah, so I've got some friends who would be good to see their opinions as well. And they're all people working in the trenches. It's like, we've had a career, had a taste. I was in Clive Barker's house. I mean, here's a man. First of all, he's self-made. I always admired that. He came from Liverpool, ended up living in Hollywood. He's a world-renowned writer, obviously. Hellraiser, the remake, has just been released. He finally owns the rights to that again, because he initially had to give them up to direct the first Hellraiser. Right. But there are other stories to tell. But what I'm trying to say is, I and James, we've had this sniff. I've been in Clive's houses and it's like, oh my God, you're overlooking Beverly Hills. You can see the whole of Los Angeles. It's like, it's amazing. This must be fantastic. And then, of course, we come back to North Hollywood. And there you go. The view from the trenches.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, cool. I think we could wrap this one up. Yes. And send it to Pete, our man in the chair, who's going to make us sound good, hopefully, with any luck. Please, Pete. Thanks. All right. This is James and Martin signing off. So long, so long, everyone.
CB. Remember when you got a CB, James? God.
So long, everyone.
Before we go, we bring you our
Fact check! Fact check! Fact check!
Fact check segment.
Here, with the benefit of hindsight
and editing,
we can own up to our mistakes.
James, it wasn't the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra your father founded. It was the National Opera Foundation of Los Angeles.
It wasn't the National Opera Foundation of Los Angeles, though, Mark. It was the Opera Foundation of Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah. Oops.
And Martin, it wasn't the Denham Film School your mum was talking about. It was Beaconsfield National Film and Television School.
Oh, well, it wasn't the robe your mum worked on, James. It was Alexander the Great.
Ah, yes, thank you for that. And also, you referred to the Henson Creature people. It's Henson's Creature Shop.
I know that, but they're creature people.
Moving on.
Oh, bloody picky.
See you next week.
Bye.